Good evening, friends, and welcome back to the lab. How do I put this? Sometimes you start working on one project and another one kind of comes up. Well, here's what I'm coping with here. I was working on, and I'm not sure how I'm going to lay this out in terms of the videos, but I was working on this project, which is my power supply, power rail project. I'll come up with a title for that eventually. But ultimately, this was going to go on my workbench. I've got this flap that comes down this board, and it's got some holes in it from stuff I did years ago. But ultimately, the plan was to mount it up on here somewhere. Actually, probably more over here. Yeah, something like that. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to put a couple of LEDs on here to indicate when the power supplies are actually powered up. So I could, even though I have wires connected to it, sometimes there's just those times when you're trying to do a project and you're going, how come this just isn't working? Oh, wait a minute, it's not plugged in. So wanted to avoid those kind of situations. Actually, this is going to drive me crazy. I can see that this is not quite lined up there. And so what I was doing was I found a couple of LEDs that I thought, oh, these would be really cool to put these LEDs on here. I just need to pick the right resistors, and I think that's a whole other video, is explaining for those that aren't familiar, and if you're watching this series and you just want the continuity, because there are plenty of videos out there for how to pick the right resistor to power your LED, and the calculations that are involved, which is not terribly complicated. I would call it early algebra, and not even really. I mean, once you kind of know what you need, there's really no unknown. You're just plugging numbers into an equation and getting an answer. But getting back to this, I was trying to choose the resistors, and I have my box of resistors here. Let me actually move this out of the way. This is how I've chosen to organize my resistors. I've got a box with 24 compartments. I've got, when I pop it open, you can see I've got a ton of resistors in there, all kind of at an angle. This is, for anybody that's curious, wants to try the same thing. It's a 24 compartment box from Harbor Freight. It seemed like it was just about perfect for the purpose here. I actually went out and picked up like 4 of these for all the other components I have too. And then I just set up a simple little document on my computer, and it just says resistors here, and on the flip side, this is literally just one sheet of paper folded over. I did not double-side or do anything terribly complicated. I put in these numbers 1011, 12, and so on. These are basically the standard sort of numbering system for a certain type of resistor, the most common, which is I forget exactly how they call it, but it's like a 24 type, and there's like a 12 type, and there's a 48 type. 24 seems to be about the most common, if I'm not mistaken. And I had bought a set of a ton of resistors years ago, and I had some other resistors from various different things. I've even got some, let's see if I can extract this one. Nice, oops, got more than one. Nice large resistor there. This was obviously harvested off a board because it's got really short leads. So this is something that goes back in my history, and to be able to use those in a modern project some 35, 40 years later was really kind of cool to me. So it kind of gives you an idea. There's different types of resistors. There's some of them are different colors. You got the blue there, and where did that just come from? 5, 6, all right. So this is why I have this. I've also tried to write numbers on the individual little pieces here, but this is really the key, is the 5, 6. So I know that these are going to go back in here. Actually, just to sort of explain that on the 5, 6, it's a 56K resistor, but the key is the first 2 numbers. 56K really means 56,000. And so it's the 5, 6 is the important part. If I had a 5.6K resistor or a 5.6 ohm resistor, those would also go in here. As it turns out, as I went through, I should say, I did find some, I'm not sure if this is coming up in the right perspective or I'm going to have to flip it over in post, but I got 47 and 51 here, and I found some 50K potentiometers, really small circuit board type potentiometers, not the bigger ones that you turn with a knob. So I put those in the 51. I found some 49s. I put them in the 51. Mainly, if I find anything that's off of these numbers, I just put it in whichever one is closest. If I really wanted to be that much more organized, I could have 2 of these at 24, but then I'd have some of these compartments that wouldn't have anything, or they'd have 1 resistor in it. So this to me was the best compromise. So that's my resistor pack. Now, getting back to the original story, I was trying to pick the right resistor to go with the LEDs. I did the calculations, but when I hooked them up on a breadboard, on a test board, they just were very, very dim. And they're old LEDs, so they're not going to be super bright like the modern ones. But, it occurred to me while I was sitting there, okay, well, I'm supposed to put a 1K resistor. Well, that doesn't seem very bright, so we'll drop the resistance, which should make it brighter. I knocked it down to 820, and that didn't make it that bright. I got all the way down to the 51 that you saw there, a 510 ohm resistor, and it still didn't seem very bright. So there is another way to do this. You might have all these resistors, but it's kind of inconvenient to have to go dig one out, try it. Oh, it's not right. Pull it out. Go find another one that's slightly smaller. That takes a fair bit of effort. There's a device called a Resistor Substitution Box, and I have a really old ICO one here, and this has been absolutely wonderful to me, except for one thing. One of the resistors, I forget exactly which one, is dead. So whenever I'm turning this switch here, let me actually sort of raise this up so you can kind of see there's numbers on there. And then I got a switch down here for low and high, so I can pick a low value resistor or I can pick a high value resistor. There's also another type of box called a decade box, which will give you say all the values from 0 to 10, and then you can also pick then from 10 to 100 and from 100 to 1,000 and from 1,000 to 10,000 and so on. And you just end up turning dials and you end up getting a very specific resistance. The only downside to that I can see is you can get a very specific resistance on a decade box, but then if you try to find an actual resistor, unless you're dealing with military specifications, which can get extremely accurate, unless you're dealing with that, if you're just dealing with common resistors, substitution box really is the key. And for most calculations, if your resistor is off by a little, it's not a huge big deal. So, ultimately the project today is I'm going to take the screws out, I'm going to pull the top off this box, I'm going to find the dead resistor and replace it with one of these. I'm hoping that I have something of a high enough value. So let's get to that and enjoy the time lapse. Alright, there we go. So now let's see if we can find the resistor that's dead. Now I know it's on this side, so it's in this. You can see the construction of this thing is pretty cool. And now I just spotted it. If I just sort of rotate around, hopefully you'll be able to see it when I get to it. Right there. I think that's about where it is. Oh, sorry, not quite yet. There, can you see the gap? There's a missing resistor right here. So I need to find that resistor. I need to check its resistance, and I need to mount it on there. I've got the soldering iron warming up. I've got some solder handy. So we're going to see if we can't find out which one is this. Turn the sweep. Looks like it's that one right there, which looks like it's supposed to be a 330 ohm resistor. So I'm going to put this back in here for a moment, put it aside, put the screws aside, pull out my box. So, as I said, I've got these numbers set up so I can put it like that and look at it here. Hopefully you can still see it. You sort of position it a little bit better. And 33 is going to be this section here. And remember, what I'm looking for is a 300, where I've got it positioned there, 330 ohm resistor. So let's see if I've got one that's an appropriate size. This looks like, alright, I have learned already that sometimes it's easier just to pull them all out, although it may seem extreme. Pull them all out, that way I can get a good look at everything I got here. Whoops, flipped one over into the next. It's one of the dangers of having them all in a box that's this size. It's a little small, just a little. There's that. Okay, now let me get my glasses so I can actually see things. And okay, I can see I've got a 330 here, but I think I need them to be a little larger. What I was hoping was that this really big one here, which looks to be about the same wattage, would be appropriate, but this is actually looks like it's a, that might actually be a 3.3 ohm. I need 330. I do have a power resistor here. It'll probably fit in there. What do you know? 330 ohms. How perfect is that? Okay, so resistors, for the uninitiated, have wattage ratings. Basically, it's a question of, you got to realize what a resistor is actually doing is dissipating energy as heat. It's converting energy into heat. And so the bigger the resistor, the more heat it can dissipate. The more current can be flowing through that resistor, the more it can resist. So ultimately they have a rating in terms of how many ohms of resistance, but they also have to have a power rating. And most of these look to me to probably be, well, you know what, there's one much larger one here. Hopefully you can see that one's bigger than the ones around it. So that could be a 2 watt resistor. The others are probably 1 watt, I would guess. Most of the resistors I have here, kind of give you a comparison. This is generally about a 1/4 watt resistor. And there's something smaller that's an 1/8 watt that exists. And I would guess that these resistors that I harvested off of something are, oops, sorry, I'm out of focus there. These are probably 1/2 watt. But if you compare that 1/2 watt to the resistors on this device here, I think those are 1 watt resistors. I am not going to try and push my luck beyond a watt when I use this. Generally, it's all low power stuff that I'm doing, so it doesn't really matter if they were all 1/4 watt, I'd be good. But I might as well, if I've got a big enough resistor, I might as well actually use it and put it in here. So I'm going to put these resistors back. Yeah, in fact, actually, I don't know how well that's going to be, how easy that's going to be to see, but that's more like an 1/8 watt resistor. It's a really tiny resistor. You can barely even, let me try and get it, let me see, put it again. Let me get the paper as a background here. Maybe that'll make it a little easier to see. That, I think, is an 1/8 watt resistor. I'm not 100% sure. The rating, the power rating is not part of the bands. They're the markings for the resistors. But I have this here, which says to me 330 ohms. I'm hoping that'll focus. Let me move over here. Sorry, I just got a text message on the phone. That's why I paused there. So that says 330. I did bring out the, oops, See, now that's the thing. I left these behind. Okay, I can show you that. 3.3 ohms. I'm hoping that's coming through. I got 330 ohms on that. I prefer to use the loose ones first before I go to the banded ones. There is no real difference in using one versus the other except just neatness of my components. Alright, let me see about putting that away. Let me put my guide back in here. I'm going to go on the assumption that that 330 ohm resistor really is a 330 ohm resistor. Got to latch these things because if this box pops open and they all fall out, you're going to see a grown man cry. Because that's a bit of work to go through and reread all of those resistors and put them all back in the right place. So, now we've got the meter. I'm going to set that to ohms. And this is an auto-ranging meter, meaning I don't have to tell it I have something in a range of 1K to 10K or 10K to 100K or 10 to 100 ohms. It should automatically figure it out for me, and let's see what it says. So I can get a good connection. My meaty fingers are kind of getting in the way here. 323, oh, sorry, it's 0.323 kilo ohms, which means 323 ohms. That's within tolerance. That's another thing to learn about resistors, and I'm sure there are good resistor tutorials you could look up. If you happen to look at the color banding on these, you'll see that the last band on most of them is silver, and that usually means 10%. 10% of 330 would be 33 ohms. So this is within 10%. So this is roughly equivalent to what we've got on here. Let me double check. I have it set for 330. That appears to be the one that's missing. Now I can mount this thing. I kind of forgot. Sometimes when you're doing soldering, if you look at it, there's a whole ring connecting everything together on this end. And that ring absorbs a lot of the heat when you're trying to solder, so it makes it harder to actually solder something on there. But that right there should fix the problem. Let's put it back in its box without the screws, just so we can have a stable way to test it. Now I'm going to hook up the two leads for my... Here's another nice thing about this particular box, and I don't know how well you're going to be able to see that. There's holes on those posts. That way I can actually stick a wire in there. Right now I'm going to stick the probes, but I can stick wires in there and have the wires coming off, and then you just screw down the top of the post, and that'll hold it in place and give you a good connection. I'm going to do that not too tight. Back on ohms, and oops, I'm on high. Let's go on low. 327.327 kilo ohms. I guess the auto ranging on this isn't perfect. Let me see if no. All right, that's fine. So just to give you an idea, so now I can drop this thing all the way down to 15. It's showing as 22 ohms. That's a little off. Interesting. There's, okay, I guess I'm getting some resistance just in the connection. So that should be 15, I'm getting 18 or 19. Here's 22, I'm getting 26. 33, I'm getting 40. I'm running through this quickly. If I really wanted to, I could probably make this more accurate. 47, I'm getting 56. 68, I'm getting 85. 100, I'm getting 111. 150, I'm getting 149. 220, I'm getting 234. and the 330 I'm getting 320 for. So I could basically keep going around, but I've now fixed this. That's pretty much the point of this video. Now the next step is going to be for me to make a video explaining a bit about the trying out the LEDs and using this box so that I can ultimately put the LEDs on here. So with that, I'll wrap it up. And while I don't have a closing yet, since this is a new series I'm doing with my gardening videos, I've got my own closing for that, but I think I'm just gonna, yeah, you know what, that's appropriate. I'm gonna credit Louis Rossmann for that one. So as always, I hope you've learned something.